Hi, I'm excited to talk to you today about SharePoint's Intranet vision and strategy. My name's Adam Harmetz. I'm the Director of PM for SharePoint Experiences.
And I'm Tejas Mehta. I'm also a program manager on the SharePoint Experiences team.
Thanks, Tejas. We'll hear from Tejas a little bit later in the talk as we get to the demo section. So we've never done this type of talk before. I'm really excited to try it out. It's a behind-the-scenes product talk. You're going to learn the why behind the product and get a sense of the strategy that's backing some of the decisions we've made. The whole goal is to be able to future-proof your intranet investments. So you can understand where we're going, where we've been, the context and history, how we're modernizing, and what the latest trends are. And so to begin, we'll be grounded in customers. In fact, I'm going to ask us to roll a tape of a customer story talking about their modern intranet.
The Lower Thames Crossing is a major new roads project to connect Essex to Kent from the A2 in Kent all the way north to the M25. And it's a very large project. We have three main companies as part of the joint venture that are currently going through the development phase to turn the project from an idea into something that can be built. Those companies work together with Howies England, who are the client. The art of a joint venture is to bring people on board when they're needed, and then they roll off the project once they're done. We need to put in tools that work from day one, get people up and running. And that's the core of why we chose Microsoft 365 in conjunction with Adin 365.
The key benefit has been a much simpler working experience for employees. Everybody's collaborating in teams and picking up their communications information in SharePoint.
It's completely shifted what we can achieve here. A couple of years ago, we were working in a world where every company involved was working in their own systems, on their own documents, on their own material.
Microsoft 365 becomes our collaboration platform, everything from chat to the team repositories, the documents, the co-authoring, the ease of use. We now use a lot of Teams meetings. So we do have a culture here of one team. And to build that cohesive team, that one team that is needed, is really, really hard. So Microsoft 365 is the core of that. And without it, I don't think we could succeed.
People are happier. Things are getting done. And they're not taking as long as they used to. And the quality of work is much better. I like to know that my work and what we've done as a team makes a difference. So I feel very good about that.
Cool. So Lower Thames Crossing is really pretty typical of many of our customers. Now, on the one hand, they're showing traditional strengths that have been true in intranets for years, really the power of a website. I like this quote on the screen right here now. People just need to know how to do their jobs. That's the biggest part of a SharePoint-based intranet. For 20 years, that's what websites have been doing, just providing critical information. And every new hire that joins the team, we talk about those core things that people are hiring us for. On the other hand, I also love Lower Thames Crossing because it exemplifies what a modern intranet means, what new trends are coming up. There is no intranet without deeply connecting it to Microsoft Teams and chat. Intranets, like at a customer like Lower Thames Crossing, need to be more rapidly assembled than ever before and more flexible. And this is another thing we talk about with any new hire that joins the team. There is no Microsoft 365 without SharePoint, without an intranet connecting it together. And yet there is no good intranet without Microsoft 365. And so with that customer context, let's actually go way back in time to the very early days of SharePoint. So in the beginning, so to speak. In the early 2000s, a website itself was digital transformation. There was nothing more exciting and critical at the time than replacing those corkboards and printed out employee handbooks with this cool new technology called a website. And we'll return to this theme a few times, but it's worth breaking down the user jobs that SharePoint's hired for. A website is nothing more than, around the office, we sometimes call it a composite experience, bringing together disparate sources in a dynamic way, balancing things like ease of creation, freshness of information, and the sense of authority. And our roots in SharePoint in the intro today are still in these user jobs, even as the UX paradigms are changing over time. And so we're really rooted in this deep sense of history. Of course, the other graphic on this slide, many SharePoint veterans will recognize as the quote-unquote SharePoint pie. And so, enterprise history has had a long history of being about bundling and unbundling different user jobs together. And for us in SharePoint, we realized pretty early on that there was so much more value we could provide than just doing a website. We specialize in connecting it all together and bringing together everything in enterprise productivity into one place in the on-prem system in the SharePoint server days. And we felt like this was a tough problem we were handling for our customers, so they didn't have to. And as a brief aside, this is a little bit of the reason that over time we divested from the public-facing Internet business. A great website builder is a really important problem, and it's what people have hired us for. But the reason you'll love us is not only that we provide great websites, but it's deeply connected to the rest of your productivity infrastructure. And we bring together so much more than just what you'd see of text and images on a website. So moving on, we'll sort of fast forward through the evolution of the internet over years. On the slide today, right here, you can see the on-prem suite. We just talked about that core framing of a website and the SharePoint Pi. And then about 10 years ago, in 2010, we entered a phase of the early cloud adoption. We made a big decision as a company, for those that aren't familiar with our history. We took our on-prem products and retrofitted them to be cloud scale. We did this for many reasons, and we could talk a whole talk about that. But really, from a customer perspective, it provided a sense of early familiarity with the cloud. There was already so much change going on, so much differences in the value chain, so much changing relationship with Microsoft as a vendor, that by providing familiar tools like SharePoint and Exchange, familiar information architecture concepts, we really felt like it could speed up the early cloud adoption. And so that was our model for a while. And then in 2015, we'll talk about this several times throughout the talk, but things were maturing. Customers were more open to taking even deeper advantage of the cloud. We had some important tech shifts that really allowed us to introduce modern SharePoint. And that was really where we kept a lot of the IA the same, but had permission to really up the user experience bar and focus on what it really meant to build a cloud-born intranet. And you can see the situation today as we enter a new epic that we'll talk about in a second. The blue line here is our modern SharePoint, essentially communication sites, and the green line is our classic publishing sites, still available from the early cloud days and still well supported. But you can see we're incredibly happy with the growth of modern SharePoint, including this year eclipsing Classic. And so it really is an interesting time to be doing this talk right now. Not only are we 10 years as an on-prem product, 10 years as a cloud product, but we're also entering a new phase with Teams as the hub, Microsoft Teams as the hub for teamwork. And we definitely have more work to do to keep SharePoint modern and to continue to invest in modern SharePoint, and we'll do that. At the time, today though, what we're really announcing is the fact that if for those customers who want it, Microsoft Teams can be the full way you experience your intranet. Over time, all the user jobs of an intranet, all the user jobs of SharePoint will be embedded in Microsoft Teams. We'll talk through, show some demos, show how that's true, and that will be an evolving product truth over time. Not only will it be true initially, but we'll even retrofit, just like we did for the cloud, more and more of the user jobs to be Teams native and Teams authentic. And Teams will just be one endpoint where the intranet will show up. Not only is it showing up in Microsoft Teams, but really you can think of the intranet as almost more components that'll show up throughout the suite. And we'll show examples of that as well. All right, before we really dig into it, let's talk about extensibility. Because I get asked a lot, is SharePoint an app or a platform? And the fact is, of course, it is both. It is absolutely an app by that traditional definition. It can be used without any pro dev involvement to achieve a massive amount of business objectives. And of course, it is a platform. Sort of Bill Gates' old definition. Partners make 3 times as much money on top of SharePoint as we do. And so that economic value we're contributing and the way we have a depth of experience for pro developers to extend makes it a platform. And we take that heritage with us. And we think a lot about that balance between app and platform and customizability and ease of use. But if you're going to understand modern SharePoint, if you're going to understand the story arc of the intranet, you have to understand how our platform has evolved over time as well. Referencing the previous slide, you think about that timeline. As we had early cloud adoption and as we developed modern SharePoint, a story for our future extensibility became clearer and clearer to us and to our customers and to our community. And it's exemplified on this slide, so I'll walk through it. It's important to talk about the major components of extensibility that have been true in intranets over the past 20 years. And maybe we'll talk quickly about the previous generation many of you might be familiar with, and of course, where we are now with our next generation. The core theme that we're going to be talking about is really, we've taken something that was very intranet-centric and made it enterprise-wide or Microsoft-centric. We went behind the scenes from having something hundreds of people were working make true to literally tens of thousands of people across Azure and Power Platform, for instance. And so it's a really exciting development of almost incubating something on-prem in SharePoint seeing its success and having it breathe through to the rest of Microsoft and really having a holistic story. So walking the slide, the website building experience, that's actually the one thing on the slide that has not changed. Yes, we have classic and modern, but the IA is basically the same. The brand is basically the same. You use SharePoint to build websites before, you use SharePoint to build websites now. The solution host is probably one of the more major strategic differences between the early days of SharePoint and intranets and today. Where before, the most popular way of creating enterprise apps was installing a couple DLLs on a SharePoint server farm. And why we had ALM around that and we had containment around that, really by moving that to Azure, I hope it's pretty self-evident the enormous amount of value that can provide for app developers, the enormous ecosystem elasticity of Azure, and really the framing of the solution host is not an intranet-specific thing, but rather as part of a larger enterprise hosting system, enterprise app hosting system, is a major strategic change that is worth understanding when you understand the story arc of SharePoint. Because it actually took a very primary user job, something that is incredibly important, but also something, as you can imagine, would constrain our ability to innovate and replat. Moved it to something that focused on that and allowed SharePoint to move forward as a dedicated intranet product. And then, of course, in a low-code scenario, everything from SharePoint Workflow to InfoPath. So this is creating workflows and orchestrating processes, rapid application development, forms development. We really have taken a huge bet on the Power Platform. And of course, that's great for efficiencies and scale for Microsoft, but even more important to customers, it allows workflows and rapid developed apps to not only reason over intranet data, but reason over an entire ecosystem, hundreds of different connectors to different apps. As you look at the low-code development model, not just as an intranet, but really intranet is another endpoint to a larger process orchestration and rapid application development low-code market. And then from a data access pattern, we had CSOM, we had REST APIs. While they followed some industry conventions, they were still pretty intranet and SharePoint specific. With the Microsoft Graph, we've made a huge, bold bet to have a coherent UX across all the different properties. So developers can code apps that reason over one API set in a coherent way with efficiencies of scale and sort of authentication, et cetera. And then finally, for extending websites, ASP.NET, master pages, these were core concepts in our previous generation, if you're familiar with them. Today, we have something called the SharePoint Framework, which, without going into too much detail, is a way where you can use commonly available modern web standards and tool chains that are client-side based to be able to extend the major components of a website, add a part, add a header, add a footer, in a way where you no longer have to hire SharePoint-specific developers. In fact, I was just talking the other day with a large bank. I asked them the latest SharePoint experts they hire. They're like, we don't hire SharePoint experts. We hire what they called off-the-shelf web developers that could quickly ramp up on SharePoint. And that is exactly the vision we had for modern. And even more so, the name SharePoint Framework is actually a bit of a misnomer because it really is an enterprise dev application development framework that can not only extend SharePoint, but also extend Teams. So if you don't have your own SaaS service, but you want to be able to deeply work with Office 365 data, no matter where it's stored, and extend it across the major properties, SharePoint Framework is and will continue to be the tool to do that. And so that is just a whirlwind tour of how intranet extensibility has evolved to really become a Microsoft-wide scoping and framing for the problem. And I thought it was really important everybody had that in their head before we continue into a drill in on modern SharePoint. So speaking of modern SharePoint, we're going to spend the next couple minutes talking about customer and technical trends. We probably talk to more customers about what they need from the intranet than pretty much any other team in the world. Not only customers, but analysts, community experts, et cetera. And so we really have this holistic picture of what we feel customers are telling us. And we'd love to share that with you. We'd love to get your feedback. And we'd just love to be able to educate on the big trends that hopefully you can incorporate into your own intranet planning strategy. So I broke these customer contexts into two things. This first slide, well, these are things that have pretty much always been true since intranets were first formed 2 decades ago. So these are 5 key themes that I would say has been true, will continue to be true. You can argue about whether they're more or less important than before, but really these were in the top 5 no matter when you're going to be talking about intranets. The first one is information overload is real. The stat that I love to use is that the content in the world is doubling every 2 years. And if anybody thinks this is just a database problem, 80% of content is actually unstructured. So it's not the type of stuff you put in a database. It's PDF, it's Word docs, it's web pages. And so a content management system or an intranet like SharePoint is pretty instrumental in figuring out that signal versus the noise. Secondly, is this trustworthy information is critical. By this, I mean there's an incredibly important role for corporate comms executives and team members, as well as leaders. Sure, we can talk about an intranet being social, and that is incredibly important in crowdsourcing. And in fact, we'll talk about that as the next theme. But I hear all the time, yes, I want to invest in that, but I need a trustworthy communication channel for my corporate comms team, for my leaders in the organization to get official words out. And then third, this connection among experts speeds innovation. Of course, in our consumer lives, we blend authority and crowdsource info, and we're still figuring out how that plays out in the enterprise. The fact is, 15% of the workforce in recent surveys across all industries feel engaged with their company. And so when you're talking about not only having authoritative content, trustworthy content, this creating connections, this ability to have a two-way channel has been true since the early days of the internet. And then this fourth principle, change in tech is hard and accelerating, and familiar tools are a comfort. Really, when a new hire joins a team, I try to say like 50% of our job is change management. Part of embracing the cloud is getting good at helping and being a partner of our customers through change. And I get it. I get a lot of feedback about how much change in the user experience and dev model we are constantly drumming out as we try to stay innovative and try to respond to customers, which is why we spend an awful lot of time trying to figure out how we can help, how we can broadcast messages out, learning from our mistakes. But the core underlying theme is that we get, our goal at Microsoft is to be a partner in helping people manage through change. And that is a just as important part of our job as it is delivering innovative software. And then finally, time to value is critical. It's ironic that this was on the perennial slide, because the average time to develop an intranet used to be 3 years a few years ago. And now, with modern SharePoint, it can be done in an afternoon. And so you can argue that time to value has become more important. But really, even in the early days of the internet, perhaps our bar has changed. But I've always constantly heard about time to value being critical. And I think about this in one respect. I want to be able to make it as easy to create an intranet so you can focus on content. And you can focus on, connecting the people that are going to actually be the authors that are going to be creating things. The actual technical project of creating, distributing elastic internet should not be difficult. The difficult problem is keeping it up to date and having enough authors, so you can focus on what's truly important. And so if that's things that have always been true since the early days of the internet, what are we hearing now? Somewhat as a result of the year 2020 and the events of the year, and partly trends that were accelerating over the past, I would say, 1 to 2 years. And, I thought maybe one interesting spin on this slide is to talk about it in terms of critiquing a website. So if in the early 2000s we invented an intranet and it was a website, these 5 trends sort of break that model and push us as a product and you as a community to think about, hey, in what ways is a website not perfect and how are we going to fix it? And of course, by the end of the talk, you'll realize how we do choose to fix all these problems. But, number one, rapid change requires transparency and flexibility. Of course, that's true in the year 2020 with COVID and the pandemic and working from home. But it was actually even true before then, where this demand for less brittle websites that had hierarchy that could not be broke, that didn't map the rapidly changing org structures of modern organizations, was something that just wasn't working. It was a good critique of website. And in fact, Tejas will show a demo in a little bit of how we've addressed some of that. And the second thing, employee well-being being top of mind. Well, websites are not a comfort to anybody. In terms of the relationship that you have with Microsoft, I think we want to help with employee well-being. And so we not only have to provide advice on how, analytics on how people are using our tools, maybe talk about providing more out-of-the-box content, and in general, trying to help with well-being and foster those two-way connections you see within an organization as well. And then we've always been busy, but it sure seems like over the past couple of years, and especially as a result of COVID, the workforce is getting even more busy. And I hear from corporate comms executives that say, how do I break through to that busy workforce? How do I be proactive? Nobody visits my website. So Microsoft, are you helping me actually get eyeballs to the critical information that needs to be there? And so, this notion of going where users already are, having multi-channel communication strategies, being proactive, it's certainly a trend, and it's certainly a critique of a static website of the years of past. And we'll talk about how we want to partner with you to help address that. And then, this is new over the past 18 months, but boy, digital transformation has truly gone mainstream. It is not just for certain industries. It is even within an organization. We're seeing the need to have intranet resources and employee engagement all the way down to the first line worker, not just the information workers, but this ability to have ROI and spend on all types of the workforce to really making sure that digital transformation is reaching every corner of the organization is definitely a trend. And then, this last one, there is a lot of excitement over artificial intelligence, machine learning. I hear a lot of curiosity and questions about how real is it, where it is on the hype cycle, and certainly how do I future-proof my intranet investments? How do I prepare for a day, could be soon, could be farther out, when machine learning really has a huge impact on knowledge and retrieval of information within an enterprise. So if that's what customers are telling us, now let me map it a little bit to the technical trends. We all sit around here and we code for a living and talk about how to build product. And so we see a lot going on in the industry, and we see the latest tech trends. And so let me go through them. And once again, for this part of the talk, I segmented it into tech trends we're actively using today, things with a lot of strength and maturity. The next level that we are very sure bets and are just coming up. And then finally, a third that is, what we're excited about, what could be next, something that's early that we're definitely incubating. But going back to the first three, what we're using today, I would say client-side web tech is incredibly mature, and it's provided a number of advantages. Frankly, one of the major reasons we did modern SharePoint, it was clear that server-side compiled code in ASP.NET was not the way that any tool would be extended, any tool would be written. So it actually gave us a cleansing moment, a moment where we could redo the intranet because we had a technical motivation to adopt client-side web tech. And a number of advantages, not only as an excuse to be able to reinvent and modernize, doing it in concert with their design team, but also it allowed us to align first and third party trends. But it can't be overstated when you write the history of SharePoint. You will talk about the depth and success of client-side web tech across the entire intranet and how that impacted intranet development, both internally and as an extension model. And then secondly, PaaS and microservices. And so you could debate the value of microservices and when you've gone too far with microservices. But the real point here I'd like to make is just really this notion of microservices and really this notion of PaaS has moved a problem of integration that we used to leave up to our customers that it's now the domain of Microsoft. By that, I mean, let me give you a story and an example. 7 or 8 years ago, I was in charge of the project for the first wave of integrations between Exchange and SharePoint. Features don't really matter, but for those history buffs, site mailbox, eDiscovery V1 integration. And it was a 15 to 20 page white paper about how you would connect SharePoint with Exchange just to get these features working from day one. It was something that the barrier to entry was huge. It was a problem that clearly Microsoft could have solved, should have solved. And it just went to show that while we've always tried to have the SharePoint pie and integrate the products, there's a huge major tech shift for us that allowed us to have these products way more deeply integrated. And this is what we've been executing on in modern SharePoint over the past 5 years. And then the third one is intelligent signals processing. I know people will probably be taking a drink every time we say the word intelligence. And it is something we invest deeply in. But I intentionally put it on this slide as something with a lot of maturity of investment for us. The fact is we have a signals processing. Internally, we call it the substrate. It is what's backing the intelligence part of the Microsoft graph. And we've been working on it for years. It is, by some definitions, the largest signal processing engine in the world in terms of collecting data and signals. And of course, we don't put it to use to sell ads. We put it to use for your end users to find value, whether that's wayfinding across your intranet to find the sites you use most frequently, or when you do file open in PowerPoint, it automatically gives you the files you were working on, or the ability to see what's trending in your team. These are things that we've been working with for a long while, and there's no feature we develop now, and certainly when it comes to wayfinding and discovery, that isn't infused with the signals going on as people are using the system. So it's something we have quite a bit of maturity on, and I would argue. Sometimes I talk with customers that are considering buying a bespoke intranet product that is not connected to the rest of Microsoft 365. And there's pros and cons, of course, but this maturity of our signals processing engine is a real incredibly technical reason why you want to make sure your intranet is part of your rest of your productivity suite, because our algorithms and our ability to provide insights gets a lot better when we have all the holistic data together. And of course, your intranet can't benefit from all these signals unless it's part of the suite. So moving on, if that's what we're using today, there's several key technologies that are emerging. We're incredibly excited about it. We have active product in that. We're certainly maybe a slightly earlier on the maturity curve for them, but they're definitely something you want to watch if you're trying to future-proof your intranet. And one is content understanding. I mentioned before that 80% of content is unstructured, but that doesn't mean there's not insights and value and metadata that can't be extracted. The demand for this is for be able to understand, having the machines understand the content and extract that value is extreme. And, people ask me, why shouldn't I just put my docs in a file share? And certainly over the time I've talked about sharing and permissions being more better, and user interfaces for quickly accessing files, and sync, of course. But really, at the end of the day, when we talk about it in 10 years, it's going to be the base level of content understanding, the ability to extract entities from images, the ability to look at forms and automatically extract the invoice price, et cetera, et cetera. The scenarios are quite long. That is going to make a difference. And the second is entity extraction, and this can be used in multiple different ways. And so by entity extraction here, I really mean our bet on Project Cortex, if you're familiar with it, and extracting the projects, the institutions, the organizations, and the topics that are being discussed and written about within your enterprise, and then have that played back to the user in a way that it's constantly available at their fingertips, balancing, of course, the AI's ability to do that with creation from those throughout the company. It is going to be, once again, when we write the book of SharePoint, one of the dominant trends we talk about in the 2020 timeframe. And then lastly, intelligent video processing. We are incredibly bullish on video and build video as a communication medium, be able to capture people's attention, and the ability for intelligent video processing tools to make it just more consumable on the go, and have a mere modal be able to create a highly professional video. These are all things that I really think are emerging strengths that are going to change the intranet and content management services landscape. And then finally, I'll spend a couple minutes on emerging tech trends, things that we're definitely excited about. It's definitely earlier on in the journey. Number one is natural language. I do think if you're talking about enterprise search, the next step function in what we call SSR, or search success rate, the ability for searches to succeed and find the content, is going to be in understanding both the content from a natural language level as well as the queries. And we're all excited about various forms of computer interaction that get evolved from natural language as well, and how that will apply in intranet, how bots and other things complement existing intranet in a multi-channel sort of way. And then there's this interesting one, feeds and composite mobile. I don't want you to misunderstand me. It is the year 2020 and not 2010. So I'm not putting mobile as a emerging trend we're unsure about yet. Certainly the SharePoint mobile app is highly rated on the App Store. We have Teams as an ever-growing mobile experience, and there's many strengths in intranet mobile, certainly responsive design being a dominant paradigm. But I do think we're at a big inflection point for seeing how feeds can impact the enterprise, as well as how you can build composite experiences that are not just based on a responsive shrunk down website. You see this playing out a little bit with App Store policies from Apple, et cetera. But I really think we're at a real inflection point where you're going to see a real explosion in meaningful mobile first solutions for intranets. And then finally, mixed reality. For those that are familiar, we have a product called SharePoint Spaces. It can work in a headset. It can also work in a browser, and it provides basically a 3D equivalent for your intranet. This is interesting. It's exciting to play around with a new space for those that have 3D content. You hire SharePoint to be able to explore your content. If the content is in 3D, your exploration should be able to be in 3D. But we're also hearing from corporate comms that it is a great way of capturing end users' attention in a very busy world. One of those core customer principles I talked about, where people just don't have time to pay attention. Creating a part of your intranet that is experienced in a new way using 3D is actually a way to get people to put down their phones and actually pay attention to the content you're trying to educate them on. So that's really why training in particular and sort of virtual tours are two scenarios that are popping there. So we've talked about customers and we've talked about the technical trends. If I had to put that together succinctly in some key principles that are true in modern SharePoint ever since it first existed, and we continue to add more depth and product truth behind them, it will be the 5 that you see on the screen right here. And this is actually going to lead to a demo from Tejas in a couple minutes, who will walk us through how we have a lot of truth across these 5 different principles. Well, I'll talk briefly about them before we get into that. Number 1 is design-led. So when we funded Modern SharePoint, we doubled, if not tripled, the size of our design team. And we really, intranets at the end of the day have this element of branding and design cohesion and design first and design forward reputation to them that we really wanted to make sure us as a product standing behind it exemplified. And so I think you've seen us, if you're following SharePoint, in terms of the SharePoint lookbook, in terms of our talks at conferences, really putting our design team front and center and empowering them to really understand what it takes to succeed as an intranet and allowing the design eye to really lead both product and user experience. And the secondly is better time to value. I said this was true back before, but we have thought incredibly deeply about how the cloud can deliver quicker value to customers across the entire Microsoft portfolio, and intranets is no exception. The third is more flexibility. This goes directly to a customer concept that we talked about a couple minutes ago. We don't want a brittle internet. We want an internet that can be updated and reflect the needs and priorities of the organization as well as its organizational structure without a way that has heavy compromise. And then as a rider to this one, I would also attach great wayfinding, because if the internet's going to be flexible, things are going to be moving around, we better be darn sure that you can find different material within your intranet easily. And so I actually think flexibility and wayfinding are 2 sides of the same coin that we think a lot as a product team on how to balance. Intelligent dynamic, this has been true, will continue to be true. We'll continue to have depth of product truth. We will use the best of technology in order to provide a website that does not get stale and that anticipates the needs of your end users. And then finally, we struggle sometimes for the right thing to call this, because intranet implies just a website. And as you see today, and certainly as you see by the end of the talk, what we're really talking about here is holistic employee engagement across multiple different channels. And especially with the concepts of SharePoint News, allowing you to be incredibly proactive as you reach out to various parts of your employee workforce or various other tools for doing that. That's really been embedded in modern SharePoint, where yes, we geek out on how to create a great website. We also geek out on how to make sure it gets the eyeballs that you're expecting out of it. So with that set up, I'm going to hand it over to Tejas. And Tejas, walk us through the product and help these technical concepts, help these customer concepts, and help these principles come alive.
Thanks, Adam. Let's spend some time showing you what we mean by modern intranet differentiators. My hope is that by the end of this demo, I've made the case that the intranet is far from dead. When Adam convinced me to join the product team a few years ago, SharePoint had just begun its multi-year journey to reimagine content collaboration from the ground up. Since then, I've personally observed our team's transformation into a design-led product organization with results plain to see in the product itself, with emphasis on great visual experience, end-user-focused intuitiveness, relentless attention to detail, and thought-leading guidance for customers to leverage with tools like the lookbook. The landing site you see here is just an example of how this comes to life, and not just in the web, but in the SharePoint mobile app as well, with responsive design that reflows pages to optimize for different form factors, as you can see here. As you will see throughout our continued innovation, we will let the product speak for itself in reflecting our core first principle, being design-led. Another key SharePoint principle is improved time to value. We've come a really long way to provide users with a simple, fast way to create content and reach users effectively with SharePoint's publishing system. Let me show you. I'll first switch to the Leadership Connection site. Now this site is an authoritative source for news in Contoso. News published here is automatically distributed broadly to all employee news feeds, including the SharePoint Start page, the mobile app, and beyond. In content rollups, like the news web part that you see here, authoritative news is visually represented distinctly, as you can see with the highlighted green title, a nice reminder to users of its source and importance. To demonstrate how easy it is to go from idea to publish, let me create a news post here, soliciting case studies for our annual giving campaign. I'll start by clicking New News Post. And to help me get started, I will pick from one of the custom templates which my company has made available to encourage consistency for the news that we publish. I'll pick the Teamwork and Culture template. See a nice visual preview of what the page will look like. Create the post. And I'll give this article a title. Giving story of the month. Give an author attribution. Now, it's easy enough for me to customize the page to suit my needs. I'll start by changing the banner to a different image. I have various sources available to me for use, including stock images, organizational assets, or I could upload my own to help me tell my story in a really visually compelling way. In this case, I'll pick from a set of royalty-free stock images. I will search for people. I will select this one, so I'll insert that. Once I'm done picking the banner, I'll edit the text. Now, while I could do that right here in the text web part and format it to suit my needs, I already have text in a Word document that I can paste directly here and preserve its look and feel. I'll first delete this placeholder text. Copy the text from my Word document. Paste it, and you can see how the highlighting is preserved. I also want to add an image to the page. And I have one locally on my machine. I can drag and drop that directly onto the page. It's included as an image web part that I can make modifications to directly. I can also drag it around to lay it out so that the image appears in the second column on my page. I also want to provide some additional resources for the reader of this news post. To do that, I will use our easy wiki linking capability that allows page authors to bring in other pages and news posts in just a few keystrokes. I will use the standard wiki linking syntax, open bracket, type ahead, and select this article. I will pick one more. And there you have it. As you can see, pulling the page together is a fairly straightforward process, with a number of capabilities to make it your own. From a publishing system perspective, examples of tools I have available at my disposal, including the ability to set audiences, or choosing a date for when I'd like the article to post. To publish this in the future, I'll pick September 12th. Once I'm happy with the layout and content and I'm ready to publish, let me do so. Click on Schedule. You will see that the scheduled publish date is displayed prominently, reminding me that the post is not yet live. So as you've seen, we've made it extremely easy for people to go from zero to publish very quickly, dramatically improving time to value. Now let's see how news is aggregated and distributed to give you a sense for how we deliver against our principle of dynamic and intelligent intranets. Let me switch over to the Contoso news site. This site brings together news from across the intranet. Think of it as a one-stop shop for employee news. Now let's have a look at the news web parts on the page. I'll go into edit mode so I can walk you through how they are configured. The first one, above the fold, is the one that employees will always see, so the corporate communications team really wants to ensure that it's highly managed and curated to include the most important news. In this web part, if I scroll down, you'll see that it's being used to organize content by pinning specific articles that users will see when they land on the site. Moving to the second news web part on the page, you can consider this web part the Tier 2 news web part. And you'll see that there are multiple sites that are selected as news sources that feed this part. You can see that the leadership connection is one of the sites that's selected as a source here. This part also has audience targeting enabled, helping users see the right content dynamically filtered so that different users see different news targeted to them. The third news part on the page, you'll see the source selected is recommended for current user. This means that news users see here is driven by intelligence based on signals we see depending on the people you work with, the sites you work with, along with organizational news. No two employees will see the same thing. This site is also a great place to see the distinction between organizational news and other news from the highlighting differences of their source. Now, SharePoint News surfaces beautifully and intelligently in other feeds as well, including the SharePoint Start page, mobile apps, and other surfaces, which I'll show shortly. Now, there's one more thing I'd like to show you. Start by clicking on this particular article. And that is the boost feature. I can take advantage of the boost feature on articles to pin them to the top of employee feeds to better ensure that users see it. Drag this one to the top. This is a key example of how we're bringing the power of curation and AI together to help employees connect with content most important and relevant for them. Click on Save. We're done. With faster time to value, along with built-in intelligence and dynamic content, the case for the intranet is strong. Moving on, let's talk about how SharePoint has become more flexible to allow your intranet and its information architecture to evolve and adapt to reflect the structure of your organization, while delivering on our promise to make finding and navigating to the sites and content users care about even easier. Let's start on the Community Outreach site. Now, this site is currently associated with the Sales Hub, as you can see from the Hub navigation at the top of the site. Now, we've had a recent organizational change, and the team responsible for this initiative now sits in the marketing organization. Fortunately, with Hub sites, it's super easy to change site association so that the structure of your intranet can reflect the structure of your org without having to recreate and migrate content to a new site. All you have to do, if you have the right permissions, is to go to Site Information and change the Hub association. So I'll change it to the Marketing Hub. I'll sync Hub permissions to this site, and I'll click on Save. I'll refresh the page, and within seconds, you see the Hub navigation change to the Marketing Hub, and the colors and the theming flows through. You'll also see that the Marketing Hub pushes a site design down to the site. We'll come back to this in a moment, but let's switch really quickly to the Marketing Hub itself. Here, you see the same theme and the same navigation available to all sites in the Hub. As we made the intranet more flexible, we realized that we really need to constantly help users find information and navigate the ever-changing intranet. Now, we accomplish this with the introduction of the new SharePoint App Bar. The SharePoint App Bar is a native in-product solution that serves both the employees' need of finding their way back to the sites they care about most, as well as the need for organizations to provide a set of curated links to the company's most important resources. Through the various pivots on the bar, I can easily get to company-curated links for global navigation, frequent and followed sites for personal wayfinding, news, and files. This persistent bar makes it easy for users to get to where they need to go whenever they want, bringing the flexible intranet to wherever they are, only a click away. Back to the site, let's scroll down and see the news part. This news part aggregates news from all sites associated with the hub. If I was to scroll back up and initiate a search, the search scope for this hub is also scoped to the hub and associated sites. When I search for something here, in this case market, the results will be pulled from all sites associated to this hub. Now let's go back to the site we moved from the sales organization to the marketing organization and check on the state of the site design. Let's see what the site design did. You'll see that branding was updated, several folders were added, as well as a list. Several metadata columns were also added to that list, and items were added and removed to the site's navigation. As you can see, in the site navigation, a new issue tracking list was added. Hubs are powerful tools that provide the ability to future-proof your intranet from things like organizational changes by making it very easy to evolve your information architecture to match that of your organizational structure. And with the introduction of the new SharePoint App Bar, along with search, we're making global navigation and personal wayfinding, as well as content discovery, second nature for users directly in the product so that it's always there wherever and whenever you need it. So if you're keeping score, that's another point for the intranet.
All right, thank you, Tejas. I always think it's so cool when we take these abstract principles and make them real in actual product. That was a quick tour of the product, really focused on showing you how these principles are in action. Of course, watch a bunch of other sessions if you just want the one-on-one tour of how to use SharePoint modern communication sites or get best practices and advice. So, let's switch gears a little bit. We talked about the website part of the product a little bit, but really the solution you're hiring is not just SharePoint, and it's not just the website. The solution is Microsoft 365 all up. We talked about this a lot from an extensibility standpoint about 10, 15 minutes ago, where we really moved the value chain not to just from an intranet, but as an intranet as a component of a larger extensibility and endpoint. And it's really true from an end user perspective as well. This is an ingredient to a much deeper relationship you'll have with Microsoft, including both IT and your business teams. In this section, we're going to frame how this works all up across multiple different brands. Then we're going to drill in on Microsoft Teams specifically, it being an evolving hub for teamwork where we have particular product passion for creating a holistic intranet experience within Microsoft Teams. So here's the one slide we often use when you want to talk about not just intranet, but how intranet fills in to a larger employee engagement experiences. And really, you can think about it as 4 different user jobs, 4 different brands, all working cohesively together. Communities and Yammer allow you to have two-way conversations. Of course, those can be embedded in intranet, which we've talked a lot about. Microsoft Teams is the hub for teamwork. Not only is it a hub, but of course it also provides live events as well as meetings and project management and modern collaboration. And of course, video, which increasingly is more and more part of an intranet and part of a document storage system. Yet at the same time, it is such an important emerging medium that stream as a concept, as a brand, as an endpoint is a way where you can get the very best in video streaming. And so, a website will coordinate all these. And that many customers will continue to work that way, where an intranet in a browser will be a dominant path for being able to composite all these experiences together and modernize an intranet. However, Microsoft Teams, as we've said many times, is taking on a larger and larger role of being the single pane of glass for Microsoft 365. And we're embracing that fully as part of an intranet. And we're excited to be talking about the home site app in Teams, which is really your intranet now in Teams. So let's talk about the home site app in Teams. We're announcing it in 2020. It is a way of bringing your intranet into Microsoft Teams, full stop. It allows you to wayfind across your intranet. And if you've invested in a home site, which you can think of as like the root or very first site that is at the top of the node of your intranet, that appears within one click. And so it's an incredibly important way where we're really allowing Microsoft Teams to be the hub for teamwork and transitioning user jobs. It is absolutely a first step in a multi-step vision as we will make the intranet deeper and deeper integrated in the Microsoft Teams, figure out what's working with customers, and we're not afraid to reinvent parts of the intranet in a more Teams authentic way. So with that, let's proceed to another demo. While Microsoft Teams is a very important part of what I would call a diffused intranet, or an intranet that is not only available in a browser, even before we talk about that, Tejas is going to walk us through a couple other ways in which the intranet is available and diffused throughout other experiences, and then we'll talk about the home site app in more detail.
Long live the intranet, now in places you wouldn't have thought of before. This brings me to the last demo of this section, focused on our remaining key intranet principle of SharePoint, which is to deliver multi-channel availability and proactive engagement. Adam talked about the evolution of the intranet at the top of the session, and I wanted to show you some examples of how we're taking a multi-channel approach to surface it across different experiences, providing natural, proactive engagement opportunities for users while keeping with the context of where users happen to be. One example is Edge. The work we're doing with the new tab page in Edge will enable users to see intranet content surface directly on this canvas. As an example, when I initiate a new tab, SharePoint news from my organization is included here as one of the content pivots available to me. This allows me to quickly consume my organizational news. That's just a quick glimpse into one example of how the intranet is surfacing in different places. Another example that I save for last is Microsoft Teams. Let me switch to Teams. As more employees choose Teams as their hub for their work, it's critical that organizations be able to effectively reach them where they are. With the new home site app we're introducing, you can bring your intranet directly into Teams seamlessly. The app's icon and name match your company brand and enable employees to discover, navigate, and consume your top sites in Teams. Let's show you. Here we are in Teams. You will notice that this new company branded home site app, Contoso, that's been pinned to the top of the Teams app bar by my admin. Once in this app, I can easily access and consume my company's intranet without leaving Teams. The landing site here is presented in its rich, immersive glory with full canvas treatment right within Teams, all with the content powered by the same intelligent and dynamic engines I showed you earlier. I have full access to the site's navigation, and am able to browse content directly on the site. Let me click on this article. Not only can I consume this article directly inside of Teams, I can also take advantage of special actions we've introduced contextual to Teams, like copy link, refresh, and open in browser. Let me copy a link to this article so that I can paste it into a channel conversation that I'm having with my peers. Let me paste the link here. And as you'll see, the link automatically unfurls into a rich adaptive card, providing additional detail and context to my team about the article, making it easier for them to engage and chat about it. Click send. Now, my peers can just click on the article and see that it opens right in line without having to leave the channel discussion. But there's more. Let me go back to the Contoso app. What we're doing is we're also bringing the best of the SharePoint App Bar that I showed you earlier to Teams. I click on the Contoso icon and see the same global navigation curated by my corporate communications team. I see personal wayfinding to my important sites, along with important company news. I can easily navigate to other sites in my intranet in line and engage my peers directly about the content that I see here. This is a great example of fostering proactive content engagement on the intranet within the communication hub of choice, Microsoft Teams. With the home site app, employees can easily stay informed and quickly share and discuss intranet content in channels and chat without ever having to leave. Your intranet has found a natural, new home in Teams. So, With Edge and Teams, I've shown you just two examples of how we are evolving the intranet to surface in the very places that they'll be seen and engaged with most, with more to come. And of course, we continue to expose many of these components, like frequent sites or like the newsfeed, to our awesome community of developers, enabling them to incorporate the flexible intranet into their own applications and experiences. I don't know, Adam. I think I've made my case. To me, it's pretty compelling. The intranet is certainly not dead. Back to you, Adam.
Thanks, Tejas. This is probably a good time in the talk to story arc a little bit and talk about what we've covered. So we talked about the modern intranet, what customers told us they needed, how we mapped that with technical trends, and had some key principles of that. And we've talked about Teams as a hub, which is really an example of a diffused internet, an internet that is being componentized and made available wherever busy people are interacting or need information. But there's a third pillar we haven't talked a ton about, which is industry-leading knowledge harvesting. We're investing an incredible ton, not only to be able to disseminate information and support communication, corporate communications executives, but also just being able to have a depth of functionality and expertise in sharing and finding knowledge. And that really comes through two investments. One is 2 years ago, we announced Microsoft Search, which brought the best of Bing technology with SharePoint Search together across dozens of different endpoints across Microsoft, from Windows to Bing to SharePoint to Office.com to Teams, to have industry-leading search. I mentioned before an emerging trend in natural language. You'll see it show up there. Microsoft Search, just like at the core theme we've talked about, started in intranet, started in SharePoint, but has certainly grown up to be something way more powerful where all of Microsoft is betting and contributing to it. And then Project Cortex, which is our ability, it's our knowledge network. It's an ability to use AI to deliver knowledge and expertise in the intelligent intranet. If you're familiar with the people cards in SharePoint, anytime you hover, or in Microsoft 365, anytime you hover over a person, you get their information and context about them. The same can and will be true for topics in your enterprise, topics, projects, organizations, etc. And this is an incredibly important investment related to both showing the proof of how AI and machine learning can actually help with real scenarios, helping with a busy workforce, as well as for information overload. And it's important that you understand this context of these investments in knowledge and how they are part and parcel as part of the intranet and are aligned to that strategy if you're going to understand the full picture of how to future-proof your intranet. So wrapping up, I talk to a lot of customers who talk about the trade-offs they need to make. And I just sort of wanted to take a second to talk about some of those common trade-offs. And as a product designer, we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can reframe trade-offs as opportunities, how you don't have to choose between A and B, but you really can set a slider that gives you the best of both, or ideally be able to not make a trade-off at all when that case makes sense. And so there are 5 key areas we see a lot of trade-offs that I just want to talk briefly and maybe reference the rest of the talk so I can put it all together for you. And the first one here is authority versus wisdom of the crowd. Hopefully you've seen this through a theme in Tejas' demos as well as my talk. There is an incredibly important role for authority, especially in the past year with COVID. Dozens and dozens of intranets were spun up explicitly to share information on COVID that were shared with us. And we love seeing those and seeing the bet that customers were using our technology to distribute incredibly authoritative and important and timely information. And yet there is a role for the crowd to be able to crowdsource. That is an incredibly important part of Project Cortex. It is an incredibly important part of an intranet that invests both in authoritative news as well as any leader or any individual publishing news. And we really think about how the intranet can balance those two extremes. And we have a lot of configurations and dials where you can set your personal threshold for authority versus wisdom of the crowd in your intranet without having to say the intranet is untrustworthy because there's some amount of crowdsourced material. The second is time to value versus customization. We've talked about that a lot today. With moving the solution host from SharePoint to Azure, it really allowed us to rewrite the time to value versus customization trade-off for an intranet. Azure is a place where you host your custom solutions. SharePoint is a place where you take those Azure solutions and extend them into it because that's where you have high traffic, allowing us to rapidly innovate, allowing us to focus on ease of use, and allowing Azure, of course, to focus on the incredible responsibility of what it means to be a solution host for enterprise code. Just one way where we've flipped the script on that. The third is security versus transparency. This notion that how locked down do you need to be, but certainly a rising trend we hear from customers all the time is the ability and need to be transparent in communications. And so this is why we thought a lot with SharePoint News, a lot with our permissions model, a lot attaching to Microsoft Teams and SharePoint Microsoft 365 groups, where you can get that balance between the two there. And then fourth is curation versus AI. Nobody from Microsoft will be claiming AI will solve all your problems. We know the right solution over time is to balance AI with an appropriate amount of curation, with an appropriate amount of human input, with an appropriate amount of social flywheels within your organization, such that you can get the best of both worlds. And then finally, probably the balance that has made the biggest difference to the design of modern SharePoint is ease of use versus power. If we could do anything, the reason we tripled the size or doubled or tripled the size of our design team, the reason we chose client-side web technology, the reason we invested in modern SharePoint and indeed are putting it within Microsoft Teams is such that we can have an incredibly powerful intranet, and yet that one that is easier to use than ever before. And around the design team, we have this notion of progressive disclosure, where you can have something that is easy to use, and as you need that power, as you need that flexibility, is progressively disclosed to you as you need it. It's an incredibly important part of how we make sure that there's not this horrible trade-off you need to make between ease of use and power, but rather it's an opportunity for you to be able to set the dial. So that concludes our talk today. In terms of, I hope what you learned, you have a sense of why we're making the product decisions we're making, what key customer needs, as well as technological and industry trends enabled us to be able to create such a strategy, and it allows you to future-proof your investment. There's a bunch of other how-to talks. If this struck a chord with you, please check out talks on how to brand your intranet, what the latest investments in SharePoint communication sites are. In terms of real call to action, move to modern. Don't stay on classic. That's where you get the advantage of all the principles we talked about today. I would argue strongly we've made a case today that an intranet is part of a larger Microsoft 365 solution. So I'd encourage you to pick an intranet product that is deeply integrated with the rest of your productivity experiences. And of course, deploy Microsoft Teams. If you're familiar and comfortable with the cloud and looking for not just a way where you're shifting on-prem usage to the cloud, but actually taking the best advantage of cloud-borne experiences, Microsoft Teams as a hub for teamwork is the way to go. And what's more, with the Home Sites app that we announced in 2020, there is zero need to make any trade-off. The best of your intranet is in Microsoft Teams. So thank you so much for the time today.